Hi guys, welcome back to the Earthy Delights podcast. We hope you're keeping well. We've got a really interesting guest on today. Her name is Katherina Kavungu, and she was a lawyer for a decade in Germany, but she's now been in Ireland for 12 years, just over 12 years, and she's an identity-orientated psychotrauma therapist, certified regression therapist, and a family constellation practitioner, among many other things. Quite the CV you've got there. How are you doing, Katherina?
I'm fine. Thanks so much. How are you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm really interested to have this talk. I think there's going to be some really important points and maybe some things that maybe people haven't heard of before. So I'm really looking forward to it. I know Jim is as well. He's got a few questions raring to go. So
Absolutely.
I'll probably let him fire away and get out of his way.
Yeah, just to begin with, Katherina, I'd love to know just a bit about yourself.
Just go ahead. Just go ahead. Yeah, just gonna ask questions. Yes, I'm gonna answer for sure. So you want me to talk a little bit about myself now?
Yeah, I'd just love to know a bit about your background.
All right. So I tell a little bit because you said already, I'm originally from Germany. You might just hear it from my accent.
Uh-huh.
And I studied law there after school. So I went to a law school. And so I'm now in my profession right now as a trauma psychotherapist. I went to quite some traumas myself in a young age. And so I lost my mother and other things happened. And so when I was just finishing with my law studies, so things from the past, they just bubbled up. And I could not suppress them. And I'm going to talk about this later, how trauma works. So it will make sense then at the end of the podcast.
Perfect.
And so I was looking for help basically because I became physically sick and I was never sick before.
Uh-huh.
So I went to different doctors and they gave me all sorts of diagnoses, but I just decided inside me now I will never have these things. But I knew also I have to do something. So at the time I was end of my 20s. I never went to a psychotherapist, to no counseling, nothing. I had no idea about psychotherapy or anything in psychology. And so a good friend of mine, she recommended me to go to a family constellation and to help me with my problems I had at the time. I was very skeptical because I was just finished. I did my second law state exam. So I was a qualified judge, actually.
Wow.
And, I was quite, it's a little bit snobby in a way. And so I studied law, right? And I thought, well, gosh, they're just going to be people, they're probably just eating organic food, are vegans, so I was a little bit different there at the time, yeah. So, and nevertheless, but the pain was strong and, I went to I started one session with conventional talking therapy and I just knew internally that's not working for me. So I spoke about it, but I found it personally for me not helpful. So then I went to my first family constellation ever. And this is, this is good. This is now 20 years almost ago.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I would have never thought that I'm going to do the work myself because I was working after my law studies in companies. So, but I went there and the main intent was to work on the trauma, which I experienced as a child because of the death of my mother. So she died on cancer when I was 11 years old. Okay. And I come from a medical family. My father was in cancer research. That was very traumatizing for the whole family. Uh-huh. And no one talked about that. So, and this actually caused me physical sickness. I didn't understand it at the time that trauma and physical well-being is connected. And so I went to the constellation, and by purpose, I wanted to have the first constellation. I didn't want to be influenced by what I was seeing from other people. The facilitator, I just told her the necessary things, so not much, and I didn't know anyone there in the whole constellation group. And I will talk about later how constellation works. It makes more sense what I'm saying now. But just right now, for now, if you do a constellation in a group, let's say you have 10 people in the group and you have your intent, you want to work on the issue. And mine was to overcome the grief, the trauma of loss. So I was choosing from 10 people someone who can represent my mother, my father. Even my mom was already many years dead. You still can do this. And I was choosing from this group representatives. It's called representatives for my family members. And then you take them and you just put them in a certain spot in the room. And then what happened there, and if I would have not seen it with my own eyes, I would probably not have believed it really can happen and it works in that way. But the moment I positioned them in the room, they started to feel what was going on in my family. Now, in my family, as I said, everyone, it was very, very difficult, and we didn't speak for years about it. So it was really bottled up, and the pain could not come up, which was at the end making me physically sick. And the moment they were standing there, they started to cry. You would not believe it if you wouldn't have seen it. And I knew they could not play it because no one knew what happened because I didn't tell any one of them. So they were just crying. 5 minutes. No one said a word. Basically, they were just crying and crying and crying. And this was all the suppressed pain within the family, which couldn't come up because everyone was so hurt and traumatized by it. And then, and I talk about it a bit later, how the whole work actually works, the Constellation work. And so at the end of the session, I jump a bit now. At the end of the session, I just felt such a relief. I could breathe. And I felt that for the first time, I really can live. And I tell you something very interesting was what happened after the session. And it also shows already how that work can impact our lives. Now, I didn't tell anyone of my family member that I go to a Constellation work. The only person who knew I will attend a session like this was my younger sister, just in case something happened, because I was very comprehensive there. So I didn't trust it really. So I told my younger sister I'm there just in case. So, and after the session where I felt so free, I felt so good. And I came home and my father was ringing me. And I have a good relationship with my father, but we never talked about my mother, as I said before, because it was so traumatizing. So we simply didn't speak about it. But on that evening, when I came home, the phone was ringing. I was picking up, and my father by himself, he didn't know anything. He talked about half an hour about my mother, and my shin just dropped. I thought, how is that possible? And this was a start of a healing journey. And so after that session, even I studied law and I was really good qualified. I already had a job offer in a very big bank in Germany. So like it looked really good. But afterwards, I just told myself, I don't know anything. And from this moment, my interest started to flame up, to know more about what is it, how do we live, how our trauma affect our lives, because this was so new for me. And so I was working for the next couple of years in a German bank. And but my interest in alternative healing methods was starting growing and growing. And then I moved to Ireland initially just to learn more English, to speak better English, because my English wasn't good. Worked here in companies, and then I just realized that that my passion is to help people. And then I retrained myself. So I started to retrain in regression therapy. And then I did two separate, the regression therapy I did in the UK. And then I did two separate trainings in family constellation. Both are in Germany. As one of this was in Germany, there was more the traditional family constellation. I talk about it a bit later. And then 2 years later, roughly 2 years later, I made another training specialized in trauma constellation. It was with Professor Dr. Franz Ruppert. It was in Spain. but he's German, so it was in German and Spain offered. So it was my second training in the method of Constellation therapy. And since then, so I have my practice here in South Dublin, and I have worked with this. So I have my practice now since 8 years, and I saw hundreds of people, I have to say, and have quite a potpourri of experiences. What I saw. Obviously, you're still learning. I'm still learning. It's not ending with learning. But I now this matter of constellation, but also now I spoke a little bit more about constellation right now than regression therapy, but I will speak about this as well. It helped many people. It helped many, many, many people. Obviously, it's not a magical method. You work, and it is hard work. It's hard work. It's not like a magical pill, but it really makes a difference in people's life. And so I love my work, and I'm happy, and it's the most beautiful rewards if you see people coming away from suicide, breaking through depression, overcoming abuse, and just stepping back into their life and lead a healthy and joyful life. It's just really beautiful.
So many things to say, Katherina. Can I just come back, and I just want to ask you, did you find the transition difficult from thinking about the world in such an intellectual way, working in the legal field in Germany, and then moving to the more like emotional side of the brain, the subconscious? How was that transition for you? Because I'd imagine it was quite difficult now, because they're almost the polar opposites.
Yes, this is indeed very good question. Now, after the first constellation, I just spoke about it. Something there was an interest there. Something opened up. Something opened up, and so I was interested in alternate healing methods. So when I started at the time with Reiki, which I don't use anymore. But this was my entrance point to learn. There's an energy field, we have an auric field, there are other things. And I became quite sensitive to energies, which I'm still using, but not with the method of Reiki anymore.
Okay.
And and I just opened myself up, and I understood that life is much more what I thought what it was. I grew up a little bit more to my background. I grew up in East Berlin.
Okay.
And at the time, so it was like a socialist country, and there, spirituality was not seen there. So people, they went to church or any other spiritual practices, they tried to suppress that. So I didn't know anything about it. And so when I started to find out there's a different area, and so there are different things. They exist, even we are not taught at school it's existing, at least not in my school years in the old GDR. So I was so interested in, and the shift happened then over the years. So I didn't transition from one year to the next. It was, I would say, it took me 5 years of transition. But I prepared everything, and the logical part is still there, so like if you train as a lawyer, you do things sometimes step by step. So the transition was also well prepared. And but I have to say, and this is my personal true statement, the moment I opened my practice, it worked from the beginning. And I have to say, I know that's not by my own account. It's not because I'm so good in advertising or anything. This was by pure grace of the divine. I have to say that this was outstanding and miraculous, that from the first moment I had my practice, it was working, and people just came. It never stopped until now. Even coronavirus, I know we talked a little bit before the podcast, like people shut down. I hear other people, other professionals, they don't have clients, or like the rate just dropped, and I just have my sessions, and I know that after many years, this is not my own doing, absolutely not.
It's wonderful. Can you break down trauma for us? Because up until very recently, I would have only associated trauma with heavy violence war, terrible childhood occurrences. But after getting familiar with the work of Gabor Mate, I kind of see trauma isn't necessarily these huge events. It can be kind of small suppressions, if I'm correct. No?
Absolutely, that's correct. It depends on the person.
Okay.
Just give me a definition on trauma based on my on practical experience, because you can read many books. And this is what also I would recommend to everyone listen to it who's interested in trauma, to read the books of Professor Dr. Franz Ruppert. It's Ruppert. It's also translated in English, some of his books.
Okay.
It's a very good account about trauma from the practical point of view, not in theory. Now, what is trauma? Trauma happens when we are exposed to a situation we can't cope, and it's connected with fear very often. So let's see, it could be a minor situation. So it could be a child 4 years old is in a supermarket, and mom goes just in a different aisle, and the child cannot see mom any longer and gets panic. Yeah. And that moment, it can happen. It thinks, it lost mom, just doesn't know what to do. And that could be a traumatic event. It's crying, it's running through the aisles, cannot find mom. Maybe there is an adult and say, oh, what's going on? I have lost my mom. I don't know where she is. And even mom comes 5 minutes later, that could already be a traumatized event for the child. Because what happens right now, in a trauma is always connected with a huge amount of stress. So each of us, we have a certain span to deal with stress. It's a band, a certain amount capacity we can deal with stress. If this stress level goes over our capacity to do, so what happens there? We go in flight mode, or we go in the mode of frozenness. So actually, when we are out of our normal threshold of stress, and flight or fighting back, it's not working. So it's our natural response. Yeah, but it's not working. We freeze. Actually, this is another significant aspect of trauma. We freeze. What happens when we freeze? The brain stops to process. There's a certain part in the brain, and I cannot process the information. So it's just, we freeze, and it creates in us a memory that we couldn't cope with that situation. Yeah. So what happens now, if it hasn't been dealt later, in later years with this event? So what happens if we are triggered? It's called a trigger. So let's see, the child is now, it was at the time for 5 years old in a supermarket, and now it's maybe a young woman, 25 years old. And she might find herself in a different situation. Yeah. And so let's see, just she might, for example, be, let's say, in an elevator and stuck. She can't get out. Yeah. So she gets panic. She doesn't know what to do. Yeah. And this could be connected with the event in the supermarket, because at the time she also didn't know what to do. She just panicked, and she gets panic again. Yeah. Or like a very common example is when people in school have been ridiculed by standing in front of the class, maybe by the school teacher, and they felt embarrassed. And this can be a trauma. And then when they are in their adult life, and they're working, and they're in companies, for example, or in any other business area, and they should represent their work, and they start to freeze. They start to feel very uncomfortable, to sweat, and enormous fear comes up, because they remember unconsciously, it has to do with our neural paths in our brain. They unconsciously remember what happened in the childhood, and the fear comes up, it happens again. So naturally they wanna protect themselves, but that fear, it's overstimulating the whole system, and they are not able to quietly present their work. So this is how it all connects together. And just let me add another component to it, which is very important for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So we now already is an overstimulation of the nerve system. It's a stressful we cannot cope with. We freeze, and what happens as well that we fragment. So it's another very, very important aspect of trauma. So what does it mean? We fragment. We fragment in our psyche. So what happened at that moment? Because we could not cope. So what we do, we try to suppress that aspect in us who experience the trauma. Now that happens with all traumatic events, but people, for example, they went to sexual abuse when they've been in childhood. So I had many clients. They could not remember these events. They've been completely blocked and suppressed. Yeah. And the subconscious is doing it to help us to literally to survive these things. And then like after some time of work, these events might just come up and the person starts to remember because the person is now able to process this. So another component of fragmentation is that the fragmented part who experienced the traumatic event needs to be suppressed. And at the same time, we have to create and develop a coping mechanism. I call it also a surviving strategy. And this surviving strategy could be all sorts of things. Could be addiction to alcohol, sexual addiction to food, comfort eating, overeating, workaholic, all sorts of, there are hundreds of coping mechanisms. These coping mechanisms, they have only one goal, to make sure that we never ever experience such a traumatic event where we've been so helpless. So this is basically the main science of a trauma. And the trauma information can also be stored in the body. There are other therapies that work with the body, which is really good, which I'm not working with. But also just to add to this one, there are information also about traumatic events stored in the body. That's basically to describe what happened when a trauma occurs, or when we experience a situation as a trauma.
That's so interesting, Katherina, and you answered about a million questions in one answer there, which is commendable. One little question that kind of came up when you were giving the example of the child losing their mother in a supermarket. What I thought on the kind of a personal experience that was when I was younger, but it was an imaginary experience. So my question is, especially when you're children, your imaginations kind of run wild. Can you experience trauma from something that actually isn't what happened? It's not objectively true, but you've imagined it. The example I give is just a quick one. When I'm from England, lived in England my whole life, but every summer, from when I was very young, my dad would take me to see his Italian family, okay? And he would drop me off with my Italian nan, and he would leave me there over the summer so that I would practice my Italian, with my cousins and so on. And I do that every summer. But I think the first summer where he left me there by myself was when I was about 4 years old. And the way that I remember the story, which I know telling it now makes no sense, and my dad assures me that this isn't how it happened, but the way that I've imagined it and remembered it is that he kind of took me to this old woman who I had no idea who she was. Obviously, she was my nan. And then just kind of like left me there. And then he went back to England. And then I was with this woman who couldn't speak a word of English. I couldn't speak a word of Italian. And it's this really strong memory that I have from my childhood. And I'm not sure I call it traumatic, but when I tell my dad that story, he's like, that is so far from the truth, because, I mean, first of all, I definitely told you she was your nan. And second of all, I didn't just take you there to a house and leave you. I stayed there for a couple of days. But I was just wondering, can you kind of get trauma from an experience that is maybe imagined, if partially or completely imagined?
The way I would see it, what happened, we have to see, you've been 4 years old. And as a 4 years old, you process information differently than an adult. So I would not say that you experience as a 4 years old is untrue. You simply had a different view. It even happens, even as an adult, let's go to a concert. Even you go with your friend, you might have different experiences from the same event. And this is what I believe happens as a child. So a child, uh, 4 years old, left in a new environment. Even when the father was there for a couple of days, this can be an overstimulation for a child. And I think this is what happened to you. Yeah. So it was an
Right.
overstimulation. There were too many informations and stimulation. You could not cope with it. So from the child's perspective, it's kind of, I was just left there and I was frightened because see, as a 4 years old, you still need your parents very, very strong. You need the mother and the father. These are your safety. This is your safety space. And so if you have been taken from your normal home environment, which is your safety, from your friends with your safety, from mom and pop with your safety, and just put in a new place, and then after 3-4 days, that leaves, because even as a child, remember, we don't know what is a 1 day, 2 days, or 1 week. It works differently as a young child, than an adult. So from your dad's perception, for him, as an adult, he thought, okay, I did everything right. I was with my son there, so you should be fine. But actually, you weren't fine. This was too much. And this then, and your perception, the way you were able to see things, that image was left with you. And this is a fear of separation, what you experienced. Yeah. So. And so it's not that you're right and your dad is wrong or vice versa. It's just that you experience the whole situation totally different because you experience it as a 4 years old.
Yeah, and it's weird because, like I said, I haven't thought of this as a traumatic experience. I don't want to try and say that my dad traumatized me or anything like that, but it's when you brought up the example of the kid in the aisle with the mum, I almost got a flashback. I was like, oh Jesus, that's exact. I know that feeling. And then you've just said there,
exactly.
then you just said there the fear of separation, and I've been trying to work very hard recently on, I hate losing friends or losing contact with people. Like I hate it. It drives me insane. And so I sometimes hold on to relationships, like with friends or whoever it may be, longer than maybe I should do, because I don't want to kind of let them go. I'm not sure if that's linked, but I was like,
Shall I tell you, remember what I said? When we experience a trauma, that we fragment and we have to suppress the trauma part who holds these very, for us, uncomfortable feelings. It's very often connected with fear, embarrassment, shame, guilt. And then at the same time, we have to create a coping mechanism. And what you just described, holding on friendships longer than it's necessary, or I would say sometimes it's unhealthy to hold on certain friendships, but the fear is there. So that's your coping mechanism. So the coping mechanism is, okay, if I'm holding on to that person, I will not experience that fear again, the fear of lost someone. I don't want to lose anyone. It was so hard for me as a child. I don't want to lose people. So you're just holding on to avoid to have that experience ever again. This is a coping mechanism.
Very interesting. Wow. Yeah, I've never thought about that, but really, really interesting.
Thanks for that, Katherina. I want to move then a little bit towards healing, and for instance, how does somebody who has maybe made a pattern of these coping mechanisms for years or for decades, how do they go about addressing this?
Okay, there are many ways and many kinds of therapies out there.
For sure.
I just speak about the therapies I'm using. It's regression therapy, and it's constellation work, and the way I'm doing it, and I have to speak a bit more about it also, because the whole work involved also. So I just going to take the example, like a child is left in a new environment and it's a bit too much. It cannot cope, and a fear of separation. Yeah, it doesn't know where the parents are because it's 4 years old. You're too young. You're very young. So that doesn't know that one. But with a 4 years old, it cannot comprehend where the parents are. It doesn't know countries. It's not logical for the child. It has its own way. So how do we heal that? So now let's see the person who experienced a trauma of loss comes into the session. So we have different ways to work with that. So one is, for example, regression therapy, and I just explain regression therapy, but that with this example. So there's that fear, and it's the fear of losing people. I know there are people, they're afraid, like, oh, I don't want to have children. I'm afraid if something happens to them and, I lose them. So, and then they decide to not have children because the fear is so strong, the fear of loss. And what we do, and sometimes people don't know why they have it. Sometimes they know, they can remember very well. But if the actually memory is very deep, suppressed, they cannot recall it, why it's actually like this. So in the regression therapy, what we do, I just very gently lead that person to the moment where they can reconnect with that emotion, but just on a surface. Yeah. So, and I ask them to go to a moment when they experience that fear. When was it the last time? And they said, oh, last time. Let's see, the trigger would be, let's take the example. It's a woman and she's afraid to have children because there's a fear of loss. And I say, just for a moment, think about that thought. And then she says, yeah, thinking about it. And then she would start to experience fear. And what I would do then, I would just going to ask that she goes to the moment in her life where that fear has been created, or where that fear has been actually feeded. And then what happened, the person, it will just comes up. As I say, all things I cannot explain. I think, as I said at the beginning, I think I believe there is a divine, and I believe it's helping us. But it's what I believe personal. And the person would go to the moment and find himself and say, I remember right now, let's see, I take this example. I've been left with my grandmother for a couple of months. I haven't seen my parents. My father was busy working. My mother was just pregnant with my sister, and I was left with my grandmother, and I just missed my mom. And I have such a fear. And so that would be the fear. And the moment she experienced the fear, because that would be a perception from the child. So many fears, many trauma and emotions connected to the trauma are actually not happening from current situation. Most of them have been created in our childhood. Many of our challenges right now. So if the person is then in that moment and she sees herself, as a child, left alone, separated, missing mom and dad, doesn't know what happened right now, why she's left there. And she might think, oh, they don't love me. Now the child starts to create a belief pattern. I'm not loved. I'm just left alone. People can leave me alone. I cannot cope. I'm powerless. I'm helpless. And so what we do, we meet all these feelings, and then when the person meets these feelings, she's processing, she's digesting these feelings. Now, it doesn't have to go. This doesn't have to take long. Sometimes it's only a couple of minutes. To be honest, it's not staying there for a long time. And once these emotions are processed, they actually naturally dissolve from the system, and the person starts to breathe, and now she can process this, and then the adult understanding can connect with the child understanding that it has been experienced in that way, but the child is not helpless. So we look also on the belief system. This is very, very spreaded, very connected to trauma. The person thinks is powerless, is helpless. Yeah, so that plays out very, very strong. So in that moment, the person can process these feelings, and the shock goes out from the system. Then the person starts to breathe and to feel better. Peace is starting to come. And what I say then usually is that as a child, the person might not have the coping mechanism or the tools to help itself, but as an adult, the person has now the tools. There's help there, and the person is not powerless. So that the person can now face any situation and will be able to get help. So we change also the thinking. So we work on different levels. We work on the emotions, and we work also on the belief system, because, as I said, very often we're holding belief systems, like I'm not loved, no one loves me, no one listens to me, people overlook me, I'm not recognized, all these things, and we change that one. And once it's changed, then the person is not, it's very important now, when it's not healed, the person is almost a slave of that fear. Yeah. I just have to add that right now, as it is in a small unit, in a individual person, we see it right now with the COVID-19. It's so much fear. And if people live in fear, no matter where the fear comes from, people are actually a slave of fear. Because let's take this example. So that woman decided to not have children because of fear of loss. So it's not a free decision. It's a decision based on fear. And the person is not free. It's a slave of fear. So the moment we are free from fear, then the person can make a very, very free decision. Okay, do I want to have children or not? Now, if I have no fear, then decision obviously will be different. If that woman is free from the fear of a loss of children, now she can make a total new and different decision. And she actually finds out, I love to have children and I'm not afraid of losing them. Actually, I want to have children. So you see the whole, how strong a life of a person can be affected when a person lives in fear. Yeah. And as I said at the beginning, trauma is always linked to fear, helplessness, powerlessness, shame, guilt, has a huge, huge impact. And I have just to add right now, because of the situation we have right now, the less we go into fear, the more we can think clear and make healthy decisions for ourselves, healthy decisions for our families. Decisions based on fear are very often not the best decision. They make us leading a life which is not good for us, and we suffer. We go in suffering.
Katherina, I'm happy to continue down this alley, but I just had to ask your opinion on this before. I wanted to ask, do you feel that modern mainstream psychological treatments fail to adequately address how our relationships with the people in our family has had an impact on how we've developed?
Well, I cannot really answer this question because, remember I studied law. I would have to make research on any any treatment available right now and to see what they're doing. And I certainly cannot do this. I know there are very good people outside. I have to say, it's not only the study, but the therapist is also only as good as the therapist worked through his own trauma. I really have to say that one. If a person, we have a saying in Germany, and it says, a good dentist is only a dentist who had experienced tooth pain. Yeah. So if a therapist, a psychologist, never worked on his own things, that didn't go through his own trauma, then the work, what he's doing, might be limited. And a person who worked a lot on itself will understand pain, will understand trauma. I learned a lot through myself, through my own behavior, through my own surviving strategies, the way I'm triggered. I learned a lot. And I'm applying this. I put this together with the trainings I had. And I have to say it again, also to the guidance which I received from the divine. Because very often in the work, I just know things. And this has not to do with the training. It doesn't have to do with my own personal experience. I just know what to do. It just comes. And I contribute this to the divine intelligence which is with us. And you see already this is my work. So I combined, at the beginning, I started to work more or I wanted to do it more as a conventional therapist, like by the book. But I just realized very, very fast now that's not working in the practical field. So then I started to combine what I learned through my trainings, through hands-on trainings, what I saw in my practice, to my own personal life, to all the trauma I went through, and I received healing. I went to many therapists myself, so I have practical experience, and I'm still working on myself. But also I opened the realm that I allow that divine healing is coming into the session, because I just see it makes a difference in people's life and in my life, that things are just brought to the surface in a miraculous way where I cannot explain how it really works, but I see that it works. So still at the beginning, when I saw it, when I was in my first family constellation, I just thought, oh, I don't know anything. So the more I dive into healing, the more I'm convinced and believe that there is a very loving force with us, with every single person. And I'm not speaking in any religious way right now, but there is a loving force, and that loving force wants people to heal, full stop. And it wants no one to be sick, because I know there are ideas outside, beliefs, or maybe I'm sick because I have to learn from it. No, it's not because you have to learn from it, because it's trauma. You have to process this. You have to heal that, because we still can learn. I don't have to go through all sorts of sicknesses in order to learn. It's also a different way possible. That's the way I see it.
Katherina, I just wanted to delve in deeper to what is family constellation. You said how much it helped you, but I'm aware that a lot of listeners maybe have no idea. Maybe this is the first time they've even come across the word and the therapy. So could you just kind of give us the bare bones of how a family constellation session works and what that would entail, and then we can get maybe into the deeper nooks and crannies of it all.
Yes. So I just pick up the example which we started a podcast with, with my own constellation. So I take it as an example and describe it. Now, at the moment I was in the constellation, there were about 10 people there, and I didn't know anyone. And then the facilitator would have asked me, just please, and this is what I describe right now is a traditional format, just please be aware there are many different types of constellation. It's not only one format. As I mentioned, I'm trained in 2 different formats of constellation work, but what I describe right now is the principle, and the principle is always the same.
Okay.
So this is the principle. So there've been 10 people, and I asked someone, please represent my father, my mother, my siblings, and so they did. And the moment you ask him, and then you take them and you place them wherever you feel they should stand in a room. So you have a room, and you ask the first person, could you please represent my father? And you give him a place in the room. And so you move on, you do it with every single person. And then you step a bit back, and you will see a certain formation. People will stand. In my case, every person was looking to the wall. No one was looking at each other. And this was reflecting the internal dynamic. So the people in this group helped me to bring into the light, into seeing what was internal going on in our family. So you basically just see it. And so the group was standing almost like in a half circle, but everyone looked outside. And this was such a deep picture for me, because I thought it's exactly how it was at the time. No one talked about that. No one talked about the death of my mother. So no one looked at each other, and they just started to cry and cry and cry and cry and cry. So
and was that spontaneous? Sorry to jump in there.
Just started,
the crying was spontaneous from these
spontaneous. They
random
could not
people.
Make it up. No way they could make it up, because as I remember, I just spoke to the facilitator just briefly, and she could not have briefed people there. That's not possible. They didn't know anything about me, about my family. And so what happened there, so it's good that you're asking actually, when people are standing there, they start to feel how the person feels in regards of the intent you have. So my intent was healing the pain of the loss of the mother. And this is what they experience, the pain. They experience the pain. That's why they cried. Because I do believe, no, this is my explanation, that, we have the physical body, but we are not a physical body. We are souls. And as a souls, we are connected to each other. It means anything what happens to someone, to us, we can feel it actually. And this is what happens in the session. They felt, and you don't have to be trained in any way. I did so many constellation work. It just happened. You don't have to be a medium or anything like this, or psyche. Yeah. Absolutely not. The people come into the constellation, never did anything like this, and start to feel. You just, if you're a human being with emotions, you can do constellation work. That's it. There's nothing more required. So, and then the people were standing there and started to feel. So this is the first step. You see what's going on. Then the facilitator came and helped a little bit, that the people who represented my family members spoke to each other. So then that's where the healing starts. So, but this is not artificial made. As a facilitator, and this is what I mentioned, you have to work with your intuitive guidance. And the guidance which I'm talking about comes from the divine. And there is a certain movement in this work. It's just like, it's almost like music. You don't go against music. You go with the flow. It's actually, I'm not doing the healing. I'm not the one who's doing these things. I'm not healing anyone. It is this miraculous, beautiful love, which I call the divine, who is present, wants people to heal, and I go with that movement, and people feel it. And after a constellation, so you will see there is a movement in the group, and so people can talk to each other in the group. You direct it a little bit, but you're not interfering. You're not manipulating or forcing. You're not doing that one. You're just helping a little bit in the movement, just helping a little bit. And at the end of the session, it was maybe 1 hour session. So what happened, that there was a communication flow established in my family members, within the family members.
Right.
And I felt such a relief. And remember what I said at the beginning of the podcast, that when I came home, and then my father was ringing me. Now, this was an outcome of the session, because there was a communication flow established in the session. And I suffered so much from the silence. It made me sick, actually. I became physically sick from it.
Yeah.
And this is what happened. This is the beauty of the world. If you do a constellation, I do not know anything what will come up or what will happen. I'm completely empty. I do not know. I just let arise what comes up, and people who standing there and representing members of the families. But you can do it for any situation. You can represent work colleagues, any other situation. And you just work, what is arising in that moment. You're not interfering, you're not manipulating, it's not what you're doing, And I know there are critics about the constellation, but I tell you one thing. If you work with this organically movement of this intelligent who knows what's going on, and you move accordingly, there's only good things coming out of a constellation. I never had anything bad happen there.
And Katherina, just to set the scene for people who may be, because I've done some reading just before this interview. So those people, for example, that you got into that semicircle, okay, it's one was to represent your father and your other family members. These people that are they're there to also do a session, correct? So after you've done your session, will you then represent a sister of theirs or whatever it may be? Like, how does it come about? Or are these people that are representing your father, your sister, and so on, are they are they practitioners as well, or are they people who are trying to get help as well? I asked because I read this review of a woman who went and did a constellation therapy session, and she said that what happened was she was third in line. I think there's four. There was going to be in the total. There's going to be 4 different sessions. Yeah, for 4 different people. She was third, and for one of the times, what she did was she represented someone's daughter who had been adopted, and the kind of dilemma here was that the woman who was in the session who needed the help, the woman had adopted her daughter, and there were 2 possible fathers. So 2 of the men that were in that group, again strangers, represented the 2 potential fathers, and the girl, let's call her Emily, represented the adopted daughter. And the girl, who again didn't know this woman before the session, had this visceral reaction towards one of the men, and the other man she completely ignored, and they took that as a sign of, well, this man, or at least who he's representing, he's the father. The other man has nothing to do with anything. Is that how it works?
Yes, this is exactly how it works. It depends how the setup is. Let's see, if you have, for example, a constellation day or constellation weekend. So you have a group of people, let's say 10 people, and they're not professionals, or they are not. There might be therapists, but usually they come from all walks of life. Yeah, they can be students, they could be mothers, businessmen. It's really completely. I always have a potpourri there. And so if you, let's say, have a constellation weekend, then then every one of them will have their own constellation. So you will get help with your constellation by the others. And when the others have their constellation, you help them by representing family members or whatever the topic is of the constellation. Now, in regards of how precise it is, I just give you 2 examples.
Okay.
Now, obviously, I cannot say it's always 100%, but after my experience, many years of constellation, it's very precise what comes up.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in one of my trainings, it was in Spain, my second training in constellation, trauma constellation. There was a woman, a Spanish woman, never saw her before, never met her, didn't know anything about her. Just joined that weekend, and she was choosing me to represent something in her constellation. I can't recall actually what it was. The moment I was placed in the room, I just felt I had a rope on my neck, and I was hanging, like I could not breathe. Yeah. And so when the facilitator, what happens, the facilitator will go through the people to the representatives, it's called representatives, and will ask them how they feel. Because based on what the people feel, we get the information. It's the information. So we know, oh, this is what happened. And very important is this, I have to actually explain it more in detail. You will find out things very deep hidden in the subconscious, or you can also find out family secrets that happened. It happened in my own family. That through a constellation, I found out a family secret. No one ever told me about it. Then we asked my father about it, and he confirmed that it was true. Now coming back to the constellation in Spain, where I presented a position for this woman in Spain. When the facilitator asked me how I feel, I said, I'm just standing there. I feel I have a rope. I'm hanging. I can't breathe. That woman just burst out in tears, with crying and crying and crying. Couldn't hold back. Yeah. And then she said, my grandfather was hanging himself. No, how should I know that? I didn't know anything about it. I never met that woman before. No information, nothing at all. But I felt that rope onto my neck, and I felt I couldn't breathe. And that's how I'd say that. That's no magic for me, but this is this is the healing power of a divine presence. In between constellation therapists, they call it the field, the intelligent field. You can hear this as well. And so for me, it's the power of the divine, the healing power, which works here, which I like that's the way I see it. Humanity has been given this instrument, and it has been brought very much into the public by Bert Hellinger, so he definitely deserves honor. But after he's not the original founder of Constellation. It comes from, I think, if I'm not mistaken, by the US. There were other practitioners before, but he brought it very, very much into the public. And there, in the meanwhile, there are many different schools doing constellation work, but the principle is always the same.
Yeah.
And as you said, with what you were reading with that woman, who they wanted to find out who was the father. If this is a very good setup, most likely what they found out will speak the truth.
And just to, I'm just to be honest, I'm a skeptic, not of necessarily family constellation therapy, but of more alternative methods. I'm more kind of down the line, but I'm open to have these discussions because I think there is something there, whether you call it the divine, whether you call it a collective consciousness, some might call it God, whatever people have these different terms. And it's that thing that none of us can explain ultimately. Right. And, my girlfriend, she's a drama therapist practitioner. And that, I mean, it's getting more accepted now, and it's been adopted by the NHS in England and so on. But that, when it first came out, was seen as a fairly, kooky thing to do, and it wasn't really accepted in the therapy field, let's say. But what would you agree that this form, I'm thinking about a listener who may be a skeptic, right? I'm thinking about a listener who wants to believe in hard science, cold facts. Okay. So their idea of therapy is sitting on a sofa, with the therapist in the room. So would you say that, because my understanding is let me see how I can explain this. Your experience is only as strong as your belief is in the divine or in the collective consciousness or God, or again, whatever you want to call it. Would you agree with that? Or have you seen people who are completely skeptical, who go in maybe because their wife forced them to do it, okay? And they go in and they're, this is a load of rubbish, but they're there anyway, maybe against their own will. And then they've come out and gone, Jesus, this was something else.
Yeah, you don't have to believe on anything,
Okay.
This is absolutely no. So we cannot say only if you believe you get healing. No, that like I got so many. Gosh, I came from a law school, and I started to work in investment banking. That's my background.
Yeah.
I grew up in East Berlin. I didn't believe in God. I never set a foot in a church. Didn't know about Jesus. Nothing. And this was my first contact. There's something more. So I went there as total skeptical, like as I said, like my parents, my father, a medical doctor, my mother, biologist, grandparents, my father's side was a lawyer, mother's side was leading a hospital. No, that was very, very logical. Yeah, very logical, my upbringing. No one told me anything about that there might be something else, like a spiritual realm. So when I went there, I was so skeptical and apprehensive, but I tell you, the pain was so strong. So that I thought, okay, I will try it once. That's what I thought. I will give it a go, and I'm happy to debunk this. I'm happy to do this. If this is just fraud, and if this is all stuff which is not okay, I'm happy to pull this apart. Yeah. So I went there very, very skeptical, and that's why I wanted to have the first constellation. I didn't want to be influenced by anything. Yeah. And then, but after what I saw there, and I knew they couldn't have information. They could not pretend to cry as they did. It was impossible. That was simply not possible. So any skeptics out, yes, I can understand that, because like you have to be also wise in alternative healing, because it's not all really, let's say, kosher. There are many things out there, and which I personally never would go there. But still out there. So you have to be wisely what you're doing, wisely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. with the constellation work, as I said, I'm working with it. I'm completely trusted it. It helped me personally and my family so much, so much. I I could just talk 2-3 hours about it. How the impact and the change had. See, my father never told me he loves me. Even I knew he loved me, and since I started constellation work, he's now telling me on the phone he loves me. Now I would not ever dream that he's telling me these things. Like there are changes in the family I would never ever thought would happen. And I know this cannot be done by a human itself. It's impossible. I experienced so many miracles. This like this I know it's not my doing. That's why I know it's not my doing. I know what I can do, but I'm also quite aware what I cannot do. So if anyone is very, very skeptical, I would always suggest, okay, come along, choose if you want to experience constellation work or even regression work. You're welcome to come here. You're welcome to go to a different therapist and have an experience. That's what I did. It was just have an actually experience, because hearing from other people's account, okay, yeah, gives us an insight. Reading books, okay, we have an intellectual understanding, but actually I have a own experience. I remember a young German woman. She came here for constellation work for the first time. She heard about it, never experienced it, And then I told her, you know what? When you represent someone else, you can feel very emotional, because you might feel their emotions. So if you start to cry, then this is what happened. That's okay. That's part of the process. Was a very tall young woman. She just looked at me and said, okay, yeah. So, okay, we're just going to see, right? So they was a little bit skeptical too. And so we started with a constellation. The moment she was placed in the role, she burst out in tears and couldn't stop it. So, and then afterward, I asked her, how was it? And she said, I could not help it. It just came over me. And this is what happened. You're not doing it. No one of us is doing that work. It's just happened. So what you do, you allow it to happen. And this has to be experienced, because I do the sessions also in a one-to-one setting. I do it with markers on the floor, so it works equally. So we find out dynamics and then bring it into healing, so the person can move on in their life. And so you go with the flow. We are not the doer. No constellation or facilitator is the doer of the work. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Katherina, can you give us an idea of the people who come to your practice? Is it really just a wide bunch of people with a variety of issues that they want to address, or is there a pattern of sorts? Or
it's like all works of life, everything from a mom, a teenager, young person, student, businessman, other therapist. It's like all works of life. Yeah. What I have very often is that people tried many other things that didn't work out. And they come in here and you say, I tried so many things, but I cannot overcome it. So I have these people as well. They come here as well. And then now we start to work. As I said, it's hard work because you're confronted with uncomfortable feelings. But as I said, once you process it, you digest it. It's like, let's see, you've been in a restaurant and you ate a steak and it never came out and sits there for years and rottens there. It's not nice. So what we do in these sessions, but so that's really how it is. You digest the steak so it comes out, and once it's out, it's out. It's done. It's done. You don't have to go in there. That's it. It's done. Yeah.
And Katherina, you briefly kind of mentioned Hellinger and how he might not come up with it from zero, but he'd certainly brought it from America and brought it into the public consciousness in a big way. And I know you didn't train directly under him, but the biggest criticisms of family constellations are, I'm not too bothered about this the fact that there's no science or hard fact science, because 20 years ago, a lot of the things that we now take for granted weren't true, and that's just been the case throughout humanity. Before, they thought the Earth was the center of the solar system, and we now know that to be false. So I'm not too bothered about the science, and I'm not interested in denying people's personal experience. But what some of the criticisms of Hellinger, which I know you're happy to talk about, he seems like quite a controversial character, and he has had some of his views are fairly controversial. I'll just read some of them out now for people who maybe aren't aware of Hellinger or his work. So some of the critics are that his patriarchal view of the family system typically leads to the conclusion that any matrimonial difficulties are the fault of the wife. He has also expressed his belief that homosexuality is a disease to be cured rather than a natural and an alterable aspect of one's nature, and has claimed to have cured people from said disease. He's also stated that war criminals shouldn't be blamed for their crimes, as they are only following orders from a higher authority, and has, in some family constellation workshop sessions, actually instructed victims of war crimes to perform a ritual gratitude to the representatives of those who have committed the crimes against them. He has, and then the one that really kind of was like, Jesus, was the one method developed by Hellinger to treat trauma resulting from incest, specifically father's abuse of his daughter, is by having the person representing the daughter kneel and thank the person representing the father for the experience. This, according to Hellinger, restores harmony within the family. Hellinger has also expressed the belief that fathers sexually abuse their daughters when their mothers repeatedly reject their sexual advances, basically placing the blame for the abuse on the mother, which kind of feeds back into that patriarchal view. I just wanted to give you the platform, for maybe who someone thought, oh yeah, this is all brilliant what Katherina says, but I'm aware of these critics, just so you could like kind of disband that. And I'll let you talk on that more.
Yes. See, I'm just picking up what I said before. A therapist can only do a therapy the way its own awareness is. And Hellinger did the work based on his understanding at the time. So if we go back, let's see, take a doctor in medieval times, they treated people, like with methods he wouldn't use today. He would say it's very dangerous, but at the time there was nothing available, and they believed this is what's good, and they had also success with it, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
And so on Hellinger, he did the method. See, the technique is a constellation, and he had his own understanding with forgiveness, sexual abuse. That's the way he started, and he had some very strong viewpoints on it, and this was feeding his work. Now, for some people I know, that was maybe helpful. For others, it wasn't helpful. Yeah, and but a person can also decide, because like I remember when I started, he was quite established and I knew certain things. Yeah. And then you still can decide if you want to go to him or if you want to go to a different practitioner. Yeah. So, and his view, his awareness also changed during his work. And certainly his work was influenced based on his state of awareness. That's what it is. And so the work what I'm doing is the same. It is influenced by my awareness. Yeah. So let's see if this is probably not true, but let's see if a therapist is a racist. Yeah. And you don't see me, but I have black skin. My father comes from Congo, so I have that one in me. So if someone, if someone doesn't like that one, and as a therapist, and they're out of the blue, someone comes in with a black skin, well, I'm telling you, the work will be affected.
Mm-hmm.
It will be not neutral to the person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a work is only as good at the end of the day, or can be as free flow as the awareness of the therapist is. And so the technique itself, it's really good, but it's exactly just take medical doctors. Let's see, we have 50 medical doctors. They all study the same. They all have the same curriculum. Yeah, the same studies. You know. And I come from a doctor family, and I remember my father giving out to colleagues, and he said, "I never would anyone bring to that doctor, never."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So you have the same thing with a therapist. The technique itself, the Constellation, it's a very helpful tool. It's a very, very good tool for healing. But if the person is in their own development awareness, can bring in things which might be not the best for a person. Yeah. So it's not the technique itself. It's the person. Yeah. It's the personal experience. So like you're gonna have a good GP here. You trust your GP. It's really beautiful. But I'm sure we all had also experience with a GP we didn't like, and they've been really cruel, and we felt he didn't care. Like just get a prescription and get out of here. Yeah. So they all study the same, but yet their personality has a play in the work. It's the same with Constellation. That would be my answer to that one.
Yeah, so what you're saying really is basically just separate the man from the theory, and that those viewpoints that are definitely antiquated, they're not endorsed by yourself nor any of the, modern practitioners of family constellations.
It depends. Some might be following his old way of doing it.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I had 2 different trainings on Constellation. And like in my training, these in quotes old ways, they haven't been taught any longer.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's the way I'm trained. I cannot speak for anyone else.
Yeah, of course.
So, and my view, it's just different. I don't want to put anyone down because it's like he brought it into the public, and he has his contribution. So I just say, because I don't like that with judgment, that he's right and or he's wrong, I'm right. No, that's not what it is. He just has a different view on things. That's it. And I might have a different view on things. And that's how the work is an influence. That's what it is at the end of the day.
Thanks for that, Katherina. Before we move to the final section, where we ask you how you get and maintain your mental health in a good order, can you let the listeners know of where to contact you or where to find more information about you?
Yeah, so that's what I would recommend right now in a time of lockdown, and hopefully it's not too long any longer. I know it's restricted, but I would really highly recommend go for a walk once a day. Just go out and do not watch for the whole time news, for the whole day news, and just make breaks from social media and from the mainstream news, because it affects the mind. In the mainstream media, it's very strong connected to fear. And as I said, if we go into fear, it doesn't do anyone good. So like having breaks, just going out for a walk if possible once a day or even more often, and do a detox from social media and news. So the way what can we do? So we have time, obviously. Some of us, they work from home. It's still busy, but if you're not being able to work from home because of the type of work we are doing, so I would suggest to surround yourself with positive things. Let's see, read positive books. Some of the listener, they might just do meditation, like mindful, just be in the present. This would be helpful. What is also really good, look a little bit on your nutrition, on your diet right now. That I would highly recommend. Like maybe just ease up on caffeine and alcohol. Not bunch in these days. It's not good. It's very destroying actually for a human being. but maybe just try supplement with vitamin C. It's really good. It makes the immune system really, really strong. Vitamin C, vitamin K, D12. It's really good in these times. So a little bit look after diet, because the diet also has an effect on our mood. There is a connection there, which I would recommend also to pay attention to sleep. Have enough sleep. If we hang around on YouTube until 3 a.m. and wake up at 7 o'clock, it has an effect on the body too. I would also, sometimes people can be very negative or very fearful, not too disrespectful, but I maybe would not talk all the time to these people. They're just in fear. Just surround yourself with these people. They're quite positive in a way where you feel, this actually, it's a lovely way of talking, And so what personal, but this is, as I said, this is personal here. So I'm reading in the Bible, the book of Psalms. I find it very beneficial for everyone out there who likes to read things like this. This is what I would recommend. It's very uplifting. It's very calming. And I know for some people, they are very affected. They are triggered, as we spoke already before in this session, that we can be triggered. That shutdown can trigger people massively. And if it's too strong, I would recommend to get help, professional help online. Myself and many other therapists, we offer online sessions. We are available, because then going for a walk or detoxing from social media, it's not helping. It's not enough. They might need professional help, and we are still operating. We are there for people. They cannot cope with this lockdown.
Thank you.
Perfect. Brilliant stuff, Katherina. Thank you so much. Jim, is there any other questions that you had before we get going, or I think I answered everything, no?
Yeah, it was very extensive. Thank you, Katherina.
Yeah. Katherina, do you just want to, before we let you go, do you just want to give people maybe your website, social media, if you have it, where people can find out more information about you, your practice, Family Constellation?
Yeah, so I have a website. You can go on. The website is www.innerhealing.ie. It's like inner healing in one word, .ie. And you can just log on to this one. There's my phone number. You can contact me, text me. There's also my email address. You can even book a session online on the website that's available. Or even I offer also 30 minutes free talks if you want to have more information of certain types of treatment, or if the treatments I'm doing would help you. You're also very welcome to just set up a 30 minutes talk, which is free. It's just a free talk to catch up and touch base.
Perfect. Well, we'll put that website in the show notes, guys. So you should see that there, and you can click on that and find all the information. We've been on your website, Katherina, and it is extensive. So all the information you could ever want to know is definitely there. And I'd just really like to thank you for your time and your knowledge. It's been really kind of insightful, and you shed some light on maybe some topics that maybe aren't so
frequently
so
addressed.
common. Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for your time, guys.
Thanks so much, Seb and Jim. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. It was an honor. Thanks so much for giving me also the time.
No worries.
Talk. Very appreciated that you like to educate people. It's very appreciated. Well done. Keep going with your good work.
We'll do our best. We'll do our best. Guys, if you like this podcast, please pass it on. If you think that anyone might benefit from Family Constellation or Regression Therapy, again, please pass it on. We hope that you've enjoyed it as much as Jim and I definitely have, and please make sure you tune in for our next podcast. Thank you, guys. Keep well. Bye.